First of all, I want to wish everybody here in London, England, a happy 4th of July. Today we are celebrating freedom and liberty. Freedom from the English. No, freedom from the bondage of self. Maybe that's synonymous. Okay. It's the English crowd over here. I'm trying to warm them up. Okay. All right. So, as mentioned earlier, this is not a particular meeting of any particular 12-step fellowship. This is an open workshop for anybody who may have any type of interest in a 12-step program. And this is, you may have noticed or put two and two together. You don't have to be Sherlock Holmes to figure it out. I am a rabbi. So based on that, I don't think anyone's going to be terribly surprised if I tell you that we're going to be looking at things from a Torah perspective, from a Jewish lens. And again, this is not a meeting of any particular 12-step fellowship. As you know, the 12-step programs are not affiliated with any sect or any religion. This is a supplemental resource purely for anybody who may find it helpful in their recovery. And I just want to make sure it's super, super clear, especially because, I am a rabbi, and I know that just the very image of the man of the cloth can trigger some very visceral reactions. So I just want to make sure everyone understands that anything I say, I'm not saying it with any type of authority. I'm just sharing my personal understanding of things. Whatever is helpful to you, that's wonderful. Whatever is not helpful to you, forget about it. Pretend you never heard it. If I tell you anything that goes against what your sponsor told you, just ignore me. You don't have to get upset. You don't have to be indignant. Well, my sponsor told me. No, it's okay. Your sponsor is right. I'm wrong. It's fine. I'm just going to tell you a bunch of stuff, and you'll take whatever it is that's helpful to you. Okay. So basically, we're here all day, and you guys don't even have the day off. In America, today's a bank holiday. This is a federal holiday, but we're here all day. What we'll do is we'll take a break in the middle of the day. We do have some type of lunch. Is that correct? Yeah? Okay, so there's some type of kosher. Okay? Kosher food. All right. So there is some type of a lunch break. I think we'll try. We'll see when we get to a good stopping point, but probably around maybe 12:30 or so, we'll try to stop for a little, maybe half an hour lunch break. Okay, so this is a marathon. Get ready. Get comfortable. All right. So first of all, I just want to speak about, maybe this is a disclaimer or an excuse or an explanation, like, why are we doing this? Why are we delving into some of the spiritual concepts, particularly the concept of acceptance, from a Jewish perspective? And I understand not everyone here is necessarily observant. Not everyone here is necessarily Jewish, and obviously, you knew basically what this was, so you have some type of interest or at least some openness to being here. But I just want to explain, and perhaps I'm preaching to the choir. Perhaps I don't even have to tell you any of this. But for my own sake, I want to just explain why we're taking this approach, and just to sort of assure you that it's going to be okay. It's going to be, yeah. What's the unspoken? What's the meta text over here? So, a lot of times people come into recovery and they have no previous experience with any type of God concept. And they come in as a blank slate. Maybe they're a little bit agnostic, but they don't have any really strong emotional associations with the idea of a higher power. And that can be a great advantage because you're coming in as a fresh slate. But sometimes people come in and they have very strong pre-existing associations with the concept of God that has to do with a religious upbringing. And I just want to acknowledge that because sometimes that can be an impediment. Sometimes people's previous associations with God and with faith were not 100% positive. And, I'll tell you something ironic. Should I say this, even though I'm being recorded? Yeah, what I've noticed is the more years they've spent in yeshiva, the longer it takes them to finish the first 3 steps. Isn't that ironic? Like you would think somebody, yeshiva bacher, he spent years learning religion. The first 3 steps, bam, you should just knock it out right away. No, it becomes this whole tortured process because there's so many layers of pre-existing associations and the people who represented God in his life or her life. And it's a very real concern. And so I guess I just want to address that before we jump in. So, let's take a look at this. All right. So this is from the big book, the book called Alcoholics Anonymous, which is colloquially referred to as the big book. And I just want to read to you from page 28, from the chapter There is a Solution. Those having religious affiliations will find here nothing disturbing to their beliefs or ceremonies. There is no friction among us over such matters. Now here the big book is saying that the program is not going to disturb your religion. I hope it's okay for me to flip that and say, I hope this religion is not going to disturb your program. Okay. And again, if anything I say clashes with what your sponsor has told you, just ignore me. Okay. We think it no concern of ours what religious bodies our members identify themselves with as individuals. This should be an entirely personal affair, which each one decides for himself in the light of past associations. That's a very interesting implication there, by the way, that the big book sort of implies that you might want to consider possibly that the religion that you were brought up in may be one that you may want to look to as you progress spiritually. Doesn't say you should, it just says in light of past associations. Okay. Or his present choice. And again, present choice. Okay. Not all of us join religious bodies, but most of us favor such memberships. Interesting. Okay. And probably, historically speaking, in the early days of recovery, in the early days of AA, it was much more common that people were religious. And I'm not an AA historian. I'm not here to talk about those changes, the societal changes, the cultural changes over the past 80, 90 years. But it is interesting that I think, at least in many places, there's less religious affiliation. And of course, religious affiliation is not something that should come up in a meeting of a 12-step fellowship, which again, I'm saying for the third time, I think this is not a meeting of any particular 12-step fellowship, so we don't have that issue. But it's interesting that the big book is saying that somebody in the program probably will have some type of religious affiliation, and that shouldn't be seen as any type of conflict with program. Okay. Here's from another chapter, from Into Action. This is on page 87, also of the big book. This is my least favorite passage in the big book, which you will understand, I think, momentarily. Let's see who can figure out most quickly. We'll give a prize to anyone who figures out most quickly why this is the one paragraph of the big book that I really don't, I have a hard time agreeing with. Okay. If circumstances warrant, we ask our wives or friends to join us in morning meditation. If we belong to a religious denomination which requires a definite morning devotion, we attend that also. Nobody caught that? It tells you have to daven shachris or the minyan. That's the most difficult sentence in the whole big book for me. At any rate, if we belong to a religious denomination which requires a definite morning devotion, we attend that also. So basically, it's saying if you happen to be part of a religion that has a morning prayer service, you should go to it. All right. If not members of religious bodies, of course it leaves that possibility open as well, we sometimes select and memorize a few set prayers which emphasize the principles we've been discussing. Now, if a person's not affiliated with any religion, so what prayers should they say? So he says there are many helpful books also. Suggestions about these may be obtained from one's priest, minister, or rabbi. Rabbi, that's the word rabbi, which is remarkable, by the way, for the 1930s in America, that they were even writing about rabbis. But at any rate, so if you need some suggestions about what to say or think about when you're praying and meditating in the morning, you can ask me, I'm a rabbi. Okay, big book says. All right, be quick to see where religious people are right. Make use of what they offer. Okay, and again, the point here is to make use of what religion offers. My agenda here today is not to win any adherents. Really, it's simply to be helpful and to tell you some stuff that I know that you may want to use. And that's it. Okay, let's look just one more thing here. This is from the 12 and 12, specifically step 11. Which step 11 is to increase our conscious contact through prayer and meditation. So that's the real spiritual. I mean, they're all spiritual. The whole program is a spiritual program, but 11 is really about continuing to deepen our relationship with our higher power. Okay. The actual experience of meditation and prayer across the centuries is, of course, immense. In the 12 of 12 here, he's talking about, like, how do you meditate? What should you think about? The world's libraries and places of worship are a treasure trove for all seekers. So interesting. It's saying that you may find some inspiration for how to pray and meditate from libraries and places of worship. It is to be hoped that every AA who has a religious connection, which emphasizes meditation, will return to the practice. By the way, just curious, it is hoped that every AA who has a religious connection which emphasizes meditation will return to the practice. So I think what that sentence means is if you have a religion, if you have a connection to a religion and that religion has some type of meditative practice involved in it, it will be good to maybe try that out. At least try it on for size. So just basic question. Judaism is the religion that I'm trained in, the one that I talk about, and the one that I practice. So just question, does Judaism have a meditation tradition? 100%, absolutely, of course. And we're going to talk about that. And in fact, in the afternoon, I think I would like to try to do a guided meditation, actually. All right. Yeah, fine. So that's that. And, okay. So that's a little bit of like a disclaimer as far as what we're doing here, taking a look at spiritual principles of recovery through a Jewish lens. And again, I repeat, everything here is just, it's being offered without any particular agenda. I'm just sharing something that you may find helpful. And I pray that everyone here will receive everything I say with the intention that I actually have, which is simply to be helpful. Okay. So now let's talk a little bit about, in general, the spirituality of recovery. Before we get into our particular focus today, which is we're going to talk about acceptance. We're going to focus on acceptance. Acceptance as it's applied to step work and acceptance as it is practiced in day-to-day life. But before we get into that, I just want to talk in very general terms about spirituality, the spirituality of the program. As we were planning today, so behind the scenes, there's always a little bit of nervousness whenever you plan an event. You bring a speaker from overseas, right? So there's a certain amount of investment there, and there's planning going on, and you're never sure who's going to show up. Is anyone going to show up, right? And then especially the topic is recovery, so you're dealing with a certain demographic who may not be great at RSVPing really promptly ahead of time, even in England, right? Okay, so like there was some discussion behind the scenes, like, is anybody going to show up? Who's showing up? Should we open this up to like anybody who has any type of, should we just say you don't have to have any interest in 12-step recovery, just anyone who has any interest in any addiction or problems with addiction. And I told the organizers, do not do that. Do not do that. Do not do that. And I said, I'll tell you why you should not do that. Very simple. Because if you advertise, this is about addiction, and it's open to anyone who has a problem with addiction, do you know who's going to come? Not one addict. All the friends and family, spouses who are still in full-blown Al-Anonism, in their codependency, are going to come here thinking that they're going to listen to a rabbi, and at the end of the day, they're going to take notes, and they're going to go to their qualifier, and they're going to hand them, here, this is what the rabbi said you got to do, right? And everything's going to be magically cured. And I said, do not do that, because what's going to happen is they're going to come here, people who are in serious pain, people who are living with the insanity of addiction, and they're going to hear me talking about spirituality, about prayer, about meditation, and they're going to flip their lid. Like I said, I know what's going to happen. I've had this experience before. What are you talking about? Why are you talking about prayer and meditation? We're talking about faith, talking about higher power. This is insanity. My loved one is out of control and is dying, is going crazy, and is ruining everybody's life, and you're talking about spirituality. Okay. So I said, let's keep it focused. Anyone who has at least, let's say, an interest in 12-step recovery, because that way I know that anyone's here at least on some level believes that there's a spiritual component to the disease of addiction and a spiritual component to the solution, which is recovery. So hopefully I'm not having to really prove the point or argue the case. And as you probably all know, that in real life, when somebody is not interested in the spirituality of the program, generally the response is go out and do more research, right? Go out and keep on trying to live life based on your own best thinking. When the pain and unmanageability is enough, come back to me, and then maybe you'll be willing to hear a little bit about spirituality, right? So, but I'm sort of making an assumption that everyone who's here today, at least to some extent, is already comfortable with this idea that the nature of the problem is a spiritual problem, the nature of the solution is a spiritual solution. Okay. And even with that assumption being made, I do want to talk a little bit about why it is a spiritual problem with a spiritual solution, because even people who already have bought into it, it's helpful for us to understand it a little bit on a deeper level. Okay. So let's talk about the spiritual problem, the spiritual solution. Probably the biggest misunderstanding about addiction that people have is that they confuse it with chemical dependency. Basically, you ask the man on the street or the woman on the street, what is addiction? They say, well, somebody uses a chemical and they get so used to it that they if they don't have it, they'll go through withdrawal, and so then they need to continue doing it. Well, I use the term chemical dependency, and the solution for chemical dependency is a pretty straightforward one. It's called detox, and it may be painful and uncomfortable, but it's pretty straightforward. It's just, if you need to go through withdrawal, so you go through withdrawal. And if you need a doctor to supervise that, great, so that's what you do. But chemical dependency on its own is not really such a bewildering problem. The problem is the person who has quite a bit of clean time, so they're not chemically dependent. Maybe life has gotten better. Their relationships are starting to be repaired. Their reputation is starting to improve. Life has become more stable and steady. And in the middle of everything just being perfectly fine, for some seemingly inexplicable reason, this person goes back to the thing that is ruining their life. So it's clearly not just about somebody physically having a dependency and having to go through withdrawal or through detox. There's something much deeper than that, something much more confusing, and it is confusing. It's baffling, and especially to loved ones who watch this and, why are you doing this? Everything was fine, everything was good, and we paid for your treatment, and you were good for 6 months, you were good for a year. Why are you doing this? So what is then the nature of this malady? So I'll tell you a brief history of the modern recovery movement, which is really the story. The origins of the modern recovery movement is the story of the origins of Alcoholics Anonymous, which was the first of the 12-step programs. Very, very briefly, there was an alcoholic. He lived in New England. His name was Roland Hazard, and he was a playboy. I would say he was a jet setter, but they didn't have jets back then. He used to travel around spending his family's money. You know, he came from the privileged class, and he went around spending money and drinking. And his family got sick and tired of it, and they said, you got to go to rehab. They didn't have rehabs back then. What did they do? They had money. They had plenty of money. So they sent him to the best care that money could buy. They sent him to Switzerland to the care of Dr. Jung, Dr. Carl Jung. And he was under Jung's treatment for months. And after he was dismissed or discharged, he found himself drinking again before he even boarded the boat back to America. So he had just been discharged from this long period of treatment with one of the world's premier psychiatrists, and here he is drinking before he even gets on the boat back home. So he comes to Jung and he explains what happened, and he conveys how disappointed he is in himself. And Jung says to him something very interesting. He says, you know, rarely have I ever seen an alcoholic of your type recover. Which is interesting. He didn't tell him that before he started. But he says that but it does happen. But Jung uses the term of a phenomenon. He says it's something of a phenomenon. A phenomenon means something that we know takes place, but we don't understand the mechanics of what causes it to take place. He says, but I have a theory, basically. And the theory is that these cases of seemingly spontaneous recovery there's a common thread, which is some type of a vital spiritual experience. That's a term that Jung used, a vital spiritual experience. And he says, this vital spiritual experience is sufficiently powerful to cause vast rearrangements of the person's personality. And what happens is, and Jung uses the term, or at least I'll explain later, I'm paraphrasing, but how this was conveyed in the big book, how this conversation was conveyed in the big book. But he says that this vital spiritual experience, causes that the ideas, emotions, and attitudes of the person are replaced with a whole new set of ideas, emotions, and attitudes. I always found that, as a rabbi trained in Hasidic mysticism, I always found that fascinating. Ideas, emotions, and attitudes, anyone with any Kabbalistic background knows that that's the 10 spheros, which are the 10 soul powers. Ideas is Chochmah, Bina, Das, the 3 intellectual faculties. emotions is chesed, gvura, tiferes, netzach. Chesed, gvura, tiferes, the three emotions. And then attitudes, the attitudinal or the executive spheroids or soul powers are netzach, yesod, malchus. So very interesting that he uses those terms to describe the makeup or the spiritual anatomy or composition of the person. At any rate, so Jung says that when a person has this vital spiritual experience, it's basically a personality transplant. And that after that happens, so the person no longer needs to drink. Which is very interesting because most people think that the solution is you teach the person how to control their urge to drink. And Jung was saying, no, it's not about controlling your urge to do it. It's about becoming a new person who doesn't even have that urge, who doesn't need to do that, which is very surprising to many people. So at any rate, Jung conveyed this advice to Roland, and he said, and I don't even know how to do that for you. I tried to do it for you, and apparently I couldn't. So best of luck. I'm revealing to you what I think will work. I don't know how to do it because I tried it on you, but that's what I think you should try to do. So Roland goes back to America, and all he knows is Jung told him he needs to have a vital spiritual experience. So he finds a group of guys in New York who are part of a group called the Oxford Group. And they are trying to practice, according to their own description, first century Christianity, which is a funny term, I think, first century Christianity. I was once talking to a friend of mine who's a Jesuit priest, Father Tom, who's also a big speaker in Al-Anon, and I said to him, it's funny that they wanted to go back to first century Christianity. I said, they could have gone back one more century and gone to Judaism, but at any rate, so Roland finds these guys practicing what they thought was first century Christianity. What they were really talking about was meditation, introspection, accountability, making amends for wrongs done. A lot of the basic tenets that later became the 12 steps. At any rate, so he starts doing this, and he gets his spiritual awakening, and his obsession for alcohol is removed from him. It's a miracle. So one of their things that they had in the Oxford Group was that you had to share with others. You had to go share what was given to you. So they told him, go find another alcoholic. So he knew this guy, Abby Thatcher, and Abby was a big alcoholic, so Roland went to him, and he conveyed to him this spiritual solution that Jung had told him, and it worked for Abby. So then they told Abby the same thing they told Roland, which is, now you got to find a guy. So he's thinking, the biggest alcoholic I know is a guy that I fought with in World War I named Bill Wilson. He lives in Brooklyn on Clinton Street. I'll pay him a visit and I'll see if he still drinks. And sure enough, Bill was still drinking. And Abby came and he spoke to him about his spiritual awakening. And at first it didn't take hold, but then later on it did. And I also want to just mention, for the sake of historical accuracy, and it is clearly, you don't have to be a sleuth to find this out. It is clearly mentioned in the big book. Bill does say that the God concept was brought to him by Abby, but Bill also says that when it clicked for him was an experience that he had in Towns Hospital with the belladonna treatment, which is a plant medicine, a psychedelic medicine. So, I know it's like a thing that a lot of people are talking about now as if it's like a brand new thing. First of all, these plants have existed since creation, but I'm just saying it's in the big book that for Bill, that's how it happened. Now, for Dr. Bob, it didn't. Dr. Bob did not take any plant medicine. Bill was able to convey to Dr. Bob the spiritual tenets of recovery, and that was sufficient. Although he had a relapse, but then he had permanent sobriety after that. Okay, at any rate, so Dr. Bob and Bill, they go to A number 3, the alcoholic on the bed, there's a famous painting of it. And long story short, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then it just starts building geometrically, and it becomes this phenomenon, just becomes this massive movement. And finally, it is like 25 years later, and it's 1961, and somebody says, you know how this whole concept of the spiritual solution to alcoholism is based on Carl Jung? Did anybody tell Jung? They're like, oh, we should have told Jung. So they realized they should have told Jung. So Bill Wilson writes a letter to Jung, and the discussion that Roland has with Jung is in the big book. So in the letter, Bill reiterates that episode, and is basically, by the way, verifying that that's what happened. Because if you think about it, when Bill wrote it, he was hearing this. He must have heard it from Ebby, who heard it from Roland. So it's already like, broken telephone game. Who knows if it was even accurate? So now Bill is writing to Jung and saying, hey, here's the conversation I heard that you had with Roland 25 years ago. Just curious if that's accurate, because we based the whole program on it. Oh, and by the way, it works, right? Like your theory. Because when Jung told him about it, he was like, it's my theory. It's my theory. And now Bill is writing them and telling me, hey, by the way, it works. Okay. So January 30th, 1961, Dr. C.G. Jung, Professor Dr. C.G. Jung. I'm reading from the letterhead here. I wish I actually should have put this on the monitor so you would have seen it better. But it's here in God of Our Understanding, which, by the way, to my knowledge, the first time that the facsimile of this letter, Carl Jung's letter to Bill Wilson, was printed in a book was in God of Our Understanding. And I had a real difficult time even locating the letter. This was in like the early days of the internet, so I had like this really low quality JPEG image, and I was trying to get a better image of it. And then I contacted the Jung estate, but then eventually they told me, no, we don't have it because we only have the German language letters. We don't have the English letters. Who has the English letters? Princeton University. I had to call Princeton. And so I asked Princeton, do you have it? And they're like, no, we don't have it. I'm like, who has it? We don't know who has it. I'm like, so why does the Jung estate tell me to call you? Well, because we have the rights to it. Well, what does it mean you have the rights to it, but you don't have it? They're like, what does it mean we have the rights to it, but we don't have it? It means if you print it and you don't get our permission first, we're the ones who sue you. So that's what it. But they said, we'll give you permission. So Princeton gave me permission to print it, but they didn't even have the letter. I only found out a few years after this book came out. The New York Times wrote an article about some stuff that I was doing with recovery. And the curator of Stepping Stones, which is the home of Bill and Lois Wilson in upstate New York, it became like an archive and museum. So she contacted me. She's like, I have the letter. So if you want to know, it's in Bedford, New York. If you're ever in New York, you want to go up to Bedford, New York. The original Jung letter is there. I haven't seen it. I haven't made my way up there yet. Okay. At any rate. So, the letter, Professor Dr. C.G. Jung, January 30th, 1961. Writing to Mr. William G. Wilson, Alcoholics Anonymous, Box 459, Grand Central Station, New York, New York. Okay. Dear Mr. Wilson, your letter has been very welcome indeed. I had no news from Roland H. anymore, and often wondered what had been his fate. So Jung didn't even know that Roland got sober based on his advice. Our conversation, which he has adequately reported to you, so that's a big sentence. Jung is confirming that the big book version of the conversation between him and Roland is accurate. Okay. So our conversation, which he has adequately reported to you, had an aspect of which he did not know. You know, a lot of people ask, how did a bunch of drunks figure out such a powerful program? Like, how did they arrive at that kind of spiritual truth? And I have an answer to that, which is just my theory, which maybe I'll tell you later, but not now. But to me, what's mind-boggling is not just that they were able to come up with this program, but the divine providence that was at every turn, where clearly, if one incident hadn't happened exactly the way that it did happen, none of this would have ever reached us. So this was one of those junctures. Because we know, like, if Roland hadn't spoken to Abby, and Abby hadn't spoken to Bill, right, none of this would have reached us, right? But here's another thing we don't even realize, and now Jung is revealing it to Bill. He says, I almost didn't tell Roland my theory. I almost didn't tell the guy. Okay, so our conversation, which he has adequately reported to you, had an aspect of which he did not know. The reason that I could not tell him everything was that those days I had to be exceedingly careful of what I said. I had found out that I was misunderstood in every possible way. Thus, I was very careful when I talked to Roland H. You understand what Jung is saying? He's saying, I had a theory, I still do have a theory, that this is a spiritual problem with a spiritual solution, but I was getting harassed for that, so what do I need it for? I don't want to be harassed, so I stopped talking about it so openly, and I almost didn't share this with Roland. But what I really thought about was the result of many experiences with men of his kind. His craving for alcohol was the equivalent on a low level of the spiritual thirst of our being for wholeness, expressed in medieval language, the union with God. Bombshell right there. So Jung says, I'm going to read that sentence again. His craving for alcohol was the equivalent on a low level of the spiritual thirst of our being for wholeness, expressed in medieval language, the union with God. In other words, what is Jung saying? Why is it a spiritual problem with a spiritual solution? He's explaining now the mechanics of it. He's saying, what does Roland and every other alcoholic really want? They want wholeness. They want wholeness. And they are simulating the effects of that feeling of wholeness through self-medicating. But if you give them the real thing that they really want, the wholeness that they're seeking, then of course they're not going to go seek alcohol. In other words, again, I just want to reiterate that the spiritual solution doesn't mean, oh, we'll give you more willpower. Because it was never a willpower issue. It's not, oh, you're going to learn how to control yourself better. Oh, you'll have an urge, but you'll fight it better. That's not the spiritual solution. The spiritual solution is you were looking for something all along. You were using your drug of choice to simulate the effect of finding that thing that you really wanted. Once you get the thing that you were really looking for all along, and then you have that wholeness, which brings you that feeling of serenity, then why would you self-medicate? Now you don't need to do that anymore. Which the implication is, by the way, let me just say the negative side of that, as long as you don't have that spiritual solution and that feeling of serenity that comes from that feeling of wholeness and union with God, then you have no choice but to self-medicate. Sooner or later, you're going to self-medicate. Okay. So Jung says this bombshell sentence, and then he writes in his own handwriting a little footnote, a number 1. And at the bottom of the page, he writes, as the heart, H-A-R-T, it's like a deer type of animal. As the heart panteth after the water brooks. This is King James translation over here. As the heart panteth after the water brooks. That means like a deer is thirsty by a stream. That's in regular American English. Okay. So panteth my soul after thee, O God. So my soul is thirsting for you, God. Psalms 42:1. And those who are familiar with the original Hebrew, Ka'ayel tare galafike moyim, ke nafshi sare gelecho elokim. Just like the deer is thirsting at the stream, so is my soul thirsting for you, God. In other words, what Jung is saying, and he's invoking the words of King David in the Psalms, is Roland was never really looking for alcohol. He was looking to feel okay. He was looking to feel at peace. And alcohol did that for him, at least for some period of time, to some extent, until it didn't. Or until it did, but with side effects that became unmanageable. But the point is that all along, all he wanted was just that wholeness, that peace. And if you can give him that wholeness and peace, which really authentically is only had through a vital spiritual experience, then he doesn't need to drink anymore. He doesn't need to drink. I'm going to just continue here. How could one formulate such an insight in a language that is not misunderstood in our days? This is 1961. A lot has not changed since then, because I say the same thing today in 2024. How can you formulate such an insight in a way that is not misunderstood in our days? It's still very misunderstood. The only right and legitimate way to such an experience, meaning to that feeling of wholeness, is that it happens to you in reality and can only happen to you when you walk on a path which leads you to higher understanding. You might be led to that goal by an act of grace, or through a personal and honest contact with friends, or through a higher education of the mind beyond the confines of mere rationalism. I see from your letter that Roland H. has chosen the second way, which was, under the circumstances, obviously the best one. The second way, so he says, you might be led to that goal by an act of grace, or through a personal and honest contact with friends, or through a higher education of the mind beyond the confines of mere rationalism. So the second one was contact with friends. That means he found the Oxford group. Okay. There's more to the letter, and I'm going to skip ahead, but I just want to read the end, where Jung spells it out very clearly again. So at the very end of the letter, Jung writes, you see, alcohol in Latin is spiritus, and you use the same word for the highest religious experience as well as for the most depraving poison. The helpful formula, therefore, is spiritus contra spiritum. That's Latin. Spiritus, meaning spirituality. Contra means against, as an antidote for. Spiritum means spirits, like wine and spirits, like alcoholic spirits. So Jung is saying the formula very, very clearly. And in Latin, it's a pun, because it's their homonyms. That the solution to the desire for self-medication is to give the person what they were really seeking all along, which is that feeling of peace and okayness. At any rate, this was one of the last letters that Jung wrote in his lifetime. He fell ill right after he wrote this letter, and he passed away a few months later. And it's really remarkable, because it took them 25 years to write this letter to Jung, and if they hadn't written it when they did, they would have never received a response. So again, this is one of these moments of divine providence that we can clearly detect in the story of how the program of recovery has reached us. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about why the connection with God is what the alcoholic or the addict is really looking for. How do we understand that idea? And again, I'm going to repeat what I said earlier on. I'm only saying this as bluntly as I'm saying it because of who's in the room right now. If I were speaking to like people who had never heard this concept before, and especially people who are like suffering right now because of a loved one, I wouldn't tell them this. It would just infuriate them. So I'll tell you a story. It's a very, very old story. One of the oldest stories. The story is that human beings were created and they were basically okay. They didn't have any neurosis, any hang-ups. They were innocent like babies. And everything was fine. Everything was fine. And then they were told one simple instruction to not violate. Do not eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And what do they go and do? The one thing they're not supposed to do, they eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Okay. Now, what is this knowledge of good and evil? What does this mean, knowledge of good and evil? So you can understand what it really means by just following the story and seeing what happens when they eat from it. Adam and Eve eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and the first thing that happens is they want to cover their nakedness. They want clothing. Before they were naked, and they were not ashamed. So God comes to them, they're wearing their fig leaves, and he says, what's up with that? Why are you wearing that? So Adam says, Eve saw it in the catalog, she said it would look cute on us, so matching. No, he says, I didn't want to be naked. So God says, who told you you're naked? Okay. Was Adam a fool? He didn't know he was naked? He knew he was naked. It just didn't mean anything to him prior to the tree of knowledge of good and evil. When we were kids, we used to try to make our friends nervous by taunting them. We used to say, your epidermis is showing. Epidermis is your skin, right? So your epidermis is showing. Yeah, okay. Big deal, my epidermis is showing. Before the sin of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, having your reproductive organs exposed was about as shameful as having your epidermis showing. It meant nothing. It meant nothing. It was just a body part that God created. Why would you be embarrassed of that? The Lubavitcher Rebbe, whose Yortzeit is next week, he once said that before Adam ate from the tree of knowledge, he'd be no more self-conscious of his genitalia than you are of the arm on which you bind the tefillin straps. It's just a body part that you use for a mitzvah. In fact, be fruitful and multiply. That's the first mitzvah. So why would you be embarrassed of a body part that God created and told you to use to serve him? You wouldn't. And he wasn't before the tree of knowledge. So then what happened with the tree of knowledge? That all of a sudden he was embarrassed and he wanted to wear clothing. So then we have to understand better, what is this knowledge? What is this knowledge? This knowledge isn't like now all of a sudden you can be an editor at Wikipedia. You can win at Trivial Pursuit. What is this knowledge? This knowledge is self-knowledge, but not self-knowledge in an edifying way. Self-knowledge in the sense of crippling self-consciousness. When Adam and Eve ate from the tree of knowledge of good and bad, what happened is they became imbued with a sense of ego, E-G-O, edging God out. As you know, I'm sure you've heard in the rooms. What that meant is before they ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, they were pure and innocent. They knew they were naked, and it meant nothing because there was no capacity in the human mind to even fathom a way to use your nakedness in anything other than the way that God intended it to be used. After the tree of knowledge of good and evil, all of a sudden, we became clever. And we started realizing, oh, there's some life hacks over here. You know, that thing that God gave us, it could be used for other things as well. I could use it for my agenda. I could use it for my fun and entertainment. And once there's that sense of self, there's that sense of shame. As long as Adam didn't have a separate sense of self, there was no shame, no neurosis, no stress. Everything was beautiful. But then he became aware of himself as a separate being with free will who can defy God, who can do what he wants to do instead of what God wants to do. And he became ashamed of that. And he wanted to cover that. And that's why he made clothing, to cover his private parts. And that became the blight of humanity. This crippling self-consciousness which was implanted within the human psyche at that moment. And it became like this epigenetic trauma that was handed down to all of the descendants of Adam and Eve, which means humanity. We were all born with this sense of self. And, you know, different people have different degrees of sense of self, but if you have a really acute case of a sense of self, it can be absolutely incapacitating. You know, that's that terminal uniqueness, right? Right, sense of self. Lonely in a crowded room, that sense of self. Nobody would understand my story. I'm different, right? Sense of self. And that just became the default. Always wanting to be a part of and instead feeling apart from. Sense of self. And that was the direct effect of eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And it's a killer. You can't live, you can't function when you're constantly self-aware. It's like, can I just be in the moment? Why do I have to be aware of myself? It's like when you become conscious of your own breathing, right? Sorry to do that to you, but, right? Or like, you ever go on vacation, and they call it holiday over here, and you think maybe you're about to just sort of be enjoying it, and some nudnik, which is Yiddish for an annoying person, but it doesn't sound in English as good as it sounds in Yiddish. Some nudnik, usually the person you went on vacation with, will tap you on the shoulder and say, hey, are you having a good time? Well, I think I might have been about to have a good time a second ago before you called my attention to it. No, and now I'm not having a good time. It's too humid. There's too many mosquitoes. This guy's breathing too loud. No, I'm not having a good time. I'm having an awful time. I'm uncomfortable in my own skin. So that's the blight of humanity, is that self-awareness, that self-consciousness. Now, 10 generations after Adam and Eve was Noah. Noah was the survivor of the flood, he and his family. And he did a very interesting thing after the flood. First he made a sacrifice, an offering to God to thank God for saving him. But the next thing he did, he planted a vineyard, he made wine, and he got drunk. Which is very funny that someone so spiritual that God chose him. You're the one we're going to save. And then you see how spiritual he was. He got off the ark and he made a sacrifice to God. And then the next thing is he goes and he gets drunk. And not just buzzed. How drunk did he get? So drunk that he passed out naked in the tent in front of his family. Really super traumatic experience there. And it seems so incongruous. Why would somebody who was a spiritual giant like Noah, and the Torah tells us that Noach ish tzaddik, he was a righteous person. Why would a righteous person go and get blackout drunk, passing out naked in front of his family? Like, so weird. But Kabbalah and Chassidus explain that actually it was precisely because Noah was a spiritual giant that he did this. He didn't have the they say hindsight is 20/20, so he didn't have the benefit of hindsight. He didn't know what was going to happen. He didn't know about the side effects. We know, looking back, how disastrous it was. But you got to think about it from his perspective. He knew one thing. He knew that since the tree of knowledge of good and evil, humanity had one problem: self-consciousness. And that self-consciousness brought that crippling sense of separation from each other, separation from our true self, separation from God. It brought shame. No one knew that was the problem. He says, well, I just got off the ark and God just washed the whole world, gave it a nice bath. There's a new world, new opportunity. It says he saw a new world. Okay, we're going to start a new paradigm of human consciousness based on the obliteration of self-consciousness. Okay, how would I achieve the obliteration of self-consciousness? Oh, we make this medicine, take these grapes, we ferment them, we make this potion, we drink it. Okay, how much do we drink? How much? Well, let's think here. What are we trying to do if we're Noah? We're trying to reverse what happened from Adam and Eve. Okay, so what was the first symptom of shame and self-consciousness that Adam and Eve experienced? They're aware of their nakedness. They're ashamed of their nakedness. Oh, so Noah says, if I want to set back the clock and go back to before that debacle, then I have to drink so much of this stuff that I don't even care that I'm naked. It wasn't an accident. He did it on purpose. And like they say, it seemed like a good idea at the time. Because he did not have hindsight. He did not know that his experience blotting out self-consciousnness would bring with it the consequences that it did. It destroyed his family. It caused a rift between those family lines, which in many ways we're still trying to heal from. But it was an innocent and well-intended mistake. And in many ways, I think that these two paradigms, Adam and Noah, describe the dilemma of addiction. That you're basically stuck between two lousy choices. Option 1 and option 2. Option 1 is the Adam option, which is crippling self-consciousness. Well, how long can you exist like that before it becomes unbearable? And then option 2 is the Noah paradigm, self-obliteration, which is the antidote to crippling self-consciousness. Which is why it's always funny when, loved ones, family members will say, like, why are you doing this? You're destroying yourself. That's right. I'm destroying myself. Self is the problem. I'm destroying it. Now, usually an addict won't articulate it that way, so eloquently, but sometimes actions speak louder than words. And, look, you wouldn't tell somebody who's taking chemotherapy, do you know that stuff, that's poison? Yeah, I know it's poison. I'm hoping it kills the cancer before it kills the rest of me, right? So you wouldn't tell somebody who's self-medicating, do you know that stuff is really, it can destroy you? Yeah, that's right. I'm trying to destroy my separate consciousness. I'm trying to destroy my ego. I'm trying to destroy that which makes me feel uncomfortable in my own skin. Yes, I'm trying to destroy that. And I'm hoping that there will be something of a life left over before, after that happens, that I'll still be alive. But, I really don't have much of an option other than these two choices. So there's crippling self-consciousness and there's self-obliteration. And just going back and forth. That's basically the story, the dance of addiction, is that you try to white-knuckle it through crippling self-consciousness as long as you can until that becomes unbearable. Then you self-medicate and go into the self-obliteration until the consequences of that become unbearable, and then you go back to the crippling self-consciousness until that's unbearable, and basically you go back and forth between these two unbearable conditions until you die. And it's very, very hopeless, and until, like I said, 90 years ago, those are pretty much the only two options for 99.9% of the people who were dealing with this condition. So when Jung describes the thirst that Roland had, the thirst for wholeness or union with God, what Jung is doing is he's identifying a third option. The third option we'll call spirituality. And the reason that spirituality is the third option is because it takes care of the problem from the Adam paradigm without any of the negative side effects of the Noah paradigm. What was the problem that Noah was trying to fix in his drunkenness? The problem of self-consciousness. Self-consciousness is a problem. Now, it's interesting that for the vast majority of the population, self-consciousness will not be an acute enough of an issue that will drive them into some type of life-destroying addiction. But for reasons which I won't get into right now, there are some sensitive souls who have such an acute case of self-consciousness that they are going to have to self-medicate to the point of self-obliteration, and that is their best option at trying to function like normal people, which is another mistake that people make. Like, why are you doing this? Like, you're not even having fun anymore. Well, who says this is fun? This is not for fun. This is to function. It's not fun. It's functioning, right? So, like, there's a person who will drink for fun. They'll go out with their friends and they'll party, and then as soon as it stops being fun, they'll stop because they were doing it for fun. Then there's the person who takes a drink so they can go to work. Not for fun, it's so I can show up for my adult responsibilities like everybody else. Or you take the drink in order to go to my 3-year-old's birthday party, because without the drink, how am I going to go to a 3-year-old's birthday party? It's very boring and chaotic and annoying, and there's little 3-year-olds. There's a lot of 3-year-olds at 3-year-old birthday parties, and you need a drink in order to be prepared for that and to function, right? So that's the alcoholic, right? So that third option is essentially this. What were you looking for all along? You were looking for an antidote to this feeling of separate consciousness, ego, that uncomfortability, we'll call it existential discomfort. Existential discomfort. Meaning to say, it's not conditional discomfort. It's not like there's anything specific in my environment that's making me uncomfortable. Just being is uncomfortable. There was an Englishman who put it very poignantly. He said, to be or not to be, that is the question. When Hamlet contemplates ending his life, he says, to be or not to be. It's interesting. I'll use a little Talmudic analysis over here, but if Hamlet's thinking about killing himself, see, I'm doing with the thumb. If Hamlet's thinking about killing himself, I don't want to trigger any of the yeshiva boys. If Hamlet's thinking about killing himself, he should have said to live or not to live. Why does he say to be or not to be? Because being and living are two different things. A dead body exists. It is, just doesn't live. A table is. It's being, just it's not alive. A table has a very comfortable existence because it doesn't have self-consciousness. I wish I could be like the table, right? Hamlet doesn't want to stop living. He wishes he could live. The problem is existence that you are aware of is unbearable. So the table exists, it's not aware of its own existence, it's comfortable. But when I exist, and I'm aware of my own existence, it's unbearable. And so he wishes he could stop that. He wants to stop having that feeling of existing. So that's the curse of the tree of knowledge. The curse of the tree of knowledge is the pain of self-conscious existence that we call ego. Noah is the solution to that, which is get trashed. Just completely erase your capacity to feel anything. The third option is remove the self-consciousness without destroying your life or anybody else's. So the third option is spirituality, because spirituality is, instead of self-consciousness, God consciousness. The beauty of God consciousness is that it replaces self-consciousness, but you keep your wits about you. You're fully in control of your faculties. You still have moral free choice. You can make good decisions. So when you do the Noah paradigm of self-medication, you lose your capacity to function as a human being. The third option, which is God consciousness or spirituality, all of the angst, the existential discomfort is removed, and yet you're completely lucid. You can be present. And if you think about it that way, isn't that really what addiction is trying to offer? It's trying to offer you the ability to be present, right? Because I need to do this in order to show up for these things that I'm supposed to show up for. And then eventually it becomes to show up for anything, to show up just even to open my eyes in the morning, to be present in this ugly world. The only way I can do it is to put on this buffer of the numbness or the distraction of my addiction, right? But the goal was only to be able to feel all right and to show up and to be present. Well, that's what God consciousness does authentically. In fact, we can rightfully say God consciousness is not a substitute for one's addiction. No, the addiction actually was all along really just a poor substitute for the God consciousness that I was seeking all along without even knowing it. Okay. So that's a little bit, just a little bit. These are very, very, very deep concepts, obviously. But that's a little bit about why this is a spiritual problem and why it's a spiritual solution. We're basically trying to, instead of get rid of ourselves, we're trying to get over ourselves. I like the idiom, get over yourself, because it has a couple of meanings. First of all, get over yourself means like, stop being so serious. Get over yourself, right? Have a sense of humor. And by the way, humor and humility and human are all connected. So when you can laugh at yourself, that's having a sense of humor and humility about the fact that you are a human. Which, by the way, human is one of those words that English gets very, very right. Humor and human and humility come from the word humus, which is earth. And in the Holy Tongue, the word Adam, Adam, is from the word Adama, which means earth. Adam doesn't mean a man. Ish is a man. Adam isn't a man. Adam is an earthling, because he was made out of the earth. He was made out of the earth. So when you recognize that you're just dirt, and you're okay with it, and you can laugh at it, so that's called getting over yourself. It's okay. I'm imperfect, perfectly imperfect, just as God made me. It's okay. I'm from the earth. What do you expect? So, getting rid of yourself is using the addiction to treat the symptoms of self-consciousness. Getting over yourself is when you discover spirituality as the authentic method for clearing out all of the pain of self-consciousness. And it's so much more effective because it clears out the self-consciousness without all those terrible side effects. I'll illustrate it with one simple example. If somebody has an acute case of crippling self-consciousness, in other words, an addict, in order to enter a room full of people and be okay and not be completely consumed with all types of racing thoughts about why is everyone staring at me, or what are they thinking about me, or So you basically have two ways of showing up in a room full of people and being comfortable enough to stay there. One is indulge in your addiction, so you'll be so numbed out or distracted that you won't care. Then you'll be able to be among people. And that works for a while. For some people it works for decades. But another option is enter the room spiritually. What does that mean, enter the room spiritually? Well, very simple. Instead of entering the room and scoping it out and seeing who here can do something for me, who's got something that I want, who should I go walk up to and approach because there may be something they can offer me. Instead, you enter the room selflessly. You enter the room to be of service. You say, I'm ready to sit here quietly and unassumingly until I'm needed. And when I'm needed, I'm ready to offer whatever it is that's needed at that moment and to be grateful for the opportunity to do so. That's how you enter a room spiritually. A person who enters the room spiritually is also going to feel comfortable in a crowded room. They're also going to be comfortable among people. So you see what we're saying, that the effect that addiction produces, which is what makes addiction so alluring because it does do something for us, right? The effect that it delivers, and here the example I'm giving is, it allows me the ability to be in a crowded room and be okay with that. That's what spirituality does authentically. It allows me to be in a crowded room and be okay with that. So now I want to talk a little bit more about the focus of today, which we said we're going to talk about acceptance as our theme. There are many big ideas, big spiritual ideas within recovery. Acceptance is one of the big ideas, and we're going to focus on that today. So I'm going to start by pulling up so you're probably familiar with this. At many meetings, they read this as a reading. This is an excerpt from the stories in the back of the big book. This is on page 417 of the 4th edition, from the story entitled Acceptance Was the Answer, which was written by Dr. Paul O. from California. And it's a famous story among the stories in the big book, and particularly this paragraph is well known. Okay. Everyone sees it. Yeah, okay. And acceptance is the answer to all my problems today. When I am disturbed, it is because I find some person, place, thing, or situation, some fact of my life unacceptable to me, and I can find no serenity until I accept that person, place, thing, or situation as being exactly the way it is supposed to be at this moment. Nothing, absolutely nothing, happens in God's world by mistake. I'm going to read that again. Nothing, absolutely nothing, happens in God's world by mistake. Until I could accept my alcoholism, I could not stay sober. Unless I accept life completely on life's terms, I cannot be happy. I need to concentrate not so much on what needs to be changed in the world as on what needs to be changed in me and in my attitudes. Okay, powerful stuff. Powerful stuff. All right. So let's talk a little bit about this. Can we gain a deeper understanding of this concept of acceptance? Like, I'm sure anyone who's attempted to practice acceptance knows how effective it is. But I want to try to see if we can gain an understanding of why it's so effective, and also how to do it more and how to do it better, how to do it more often. So I'm gonna kind of do a deep dive over here. And again, I'm praying that the intention of my words be received, and that everyone is able to hear this is merely my attempt to be as helpful as possible. And again, I'll repeat the disclaimer. If you hear anything I say, sometimes I tend to speak in absolutes, just put a big asterisk or whatever you need to, a disclaimer on it. And you don't have to accept anything I'm saying. You can go check with your sponsor later, and you can go think about it on your own. Whatever you want to do to just make sure you're comfortable with this information. I'm going to put it out there, and you'll decide how much of it you want to implement into your life. Okay. So let's talk about this idea of acceptance. I think that Paul O's description of acceptance is really remarkable because he makes some really bold theological statements, like really bold theological statements. He doesn't just say acceptance is the answer to all my problems and therefore I need to change my attitudes and not change other people. He does say that, but he says a lot more than that. He says some very strong words about the nature of reality. And again, Dr. Paul O is just saying his opinion, so you don't have to agree with him either. He's just one person sharing his experience. But he's saying, in his view, strong words, absolutely nothing happens in God's world by mistake. That's a powerful statement. And it's a categorical statement. It doesn't even allow for exceptions. Nothing. And in case you think nothing has exceptions, absolutely nothing happens in God's world by mistake, right? So, how are we to understand this? So I'm going to give you a deeper way to wrap your mind around this concept. In other words, not to just take it on faith because it sounds inspiring and it sounds true. I want to give you a way to think about it intelligently. And I believe that this is, what we're about to talk about is part of the 11th step. I do believe this is part of our conscious contact. When we understand these deep spiritual concepts in a more relatable way, I think that is part of improving our conscious contact. So let's talk about this assertion that Dr. Paul makes that absolutely nothing happens in God's world by mistake. Okay. It's a comforting thought, but how true is it? And if so, like, what makes it true? Or how can I understand why it's true? So I'll share with you a concept. The concept is basically cosmology. Cosmology means the study of the origins of the universe. Or perhaps more accurately, the study of the origins of existence. And I'm going to offer to you a model. It's a model. And I'm not particularly concerned whether or not you decide to believe in this model or not. I'm giving it to you as a tool. Here's a model for understanding existence. I'll tell you, it is a Jewish, Kabbalistic, Hasidic model. So, existence. What is existence? You look around, you see the walls around you, you see the lamp, you see the table, these things exist. Okay. But they didn't always exist. They didn't always exist. They came into existence. And that's the concept of creation. Creation means how things that didn't exist now exist, as they were created. Now, a creation implies a creator. I'm not so concerned right now with other aspects of this creator, but the one aspect of the creator I want to focus on right now is the manner of his existence and how it differs from the manner of creation's existence. You follow what I'm saying? the manner of the Creator's existence and how it fundamentally differs from the manner of the creation's existence. I'm going to try to say this in simple terms. The difference between the manner of the Creator's existence and the manner of the creation's existence is that the manner of the Creator's existence is unconditional or absolute, and the manner of the creation's existence is conditional or relative. I know this sounds very, very deep, but all I'm saying is this, that the table didn't always exist. It may not continue to exist. In theory, there's a reality in which it doesn't exist. So its existence is not absolute. It happens to be here. Okay, it's here. Then you have the Creator's existence, which is absolute. In other words, God exists because he just exists. But mommy, who made God? No one. Then how did he get there? He was always there. That's not just the answer to the 5-year-old. That's actually true. In other words, if you have an origin story for your God, that ain't God. Because the nature of the Creator's existence is that which just exists. It doesn't come into existence. It doesn't have a reason to exist. It doesn't need an excuse to exist. It is existence in its most absolute, unconditional sense. It just is. Now, this may sound very deep, might sound super mystical, and maybe very religious. And I'm also, again, aware of the associations which this kind of talk may have for some of you. And I'm conscious of that and trying to be sensitive to that. So after I'm just making these crazy statements about the Creator is absolute existence, God just is, I just want to share a few words here from the big book. This is from page 53 from We Agnostics. One of my favorite lines. When we became alcoholics, crushed by a self-imposed crisis we could not postpone or evade, we had to fearlessly face the proposition that either God is everything or else he is nothing. God either is or he isn't. What was our choice to be? Now that's a very interesting sentence, or few sentences. And this proposition that the big book is making, why is it forcing me into this binary choice? Either he is or he isn't. He's everything or he's nothing. Why is that the proposition? In other words, if all I need to do is believe in a higher power, then all I have to admit is that God's existence is bigger, stronger, and tougher than mine. And that should be enough. Why do I have to go as far as to say that God is everything? And if he's not everything, then he's nothing. Like, why so absolute? Why so black and white? Ever thought about this? I don't know the intention of the co-authors of the big book, but here's what makes a lot of sense to me. We're not just saying that God is the higher power. Yeah, I know he's bigger, stronger, tougher than me. I know that. What we're saying, what the big book is saying, is that God is everything. He's not just bigger than you. So here's God and here's you. Right? He's massive and you're a speck. No, because if he's massive and you're a speck, still a speck is, let's say it's 1 billion times smaller than God, or it's 1 trillion times smaller, but it's still a quantifiable number, which means God is everything minus that little billionth or trillionth that the speck takes up, which means God is not everything, which the big book says means, therefore he's nothing. So it means that I'm not even a speck. Nothing is a speck. The whole universe, all of creation, it's not even a little speck. How do we understand this? So what you following here the question? Like, okay. What we're saying here, to my understanding, is not just that God is bigger than creation, more powerful than creation, but that God is the only existence. There is no other existence. And the minute you say there's an other existence, then you're saying he's not everything, because he's everything minus whatever that other thing is. And if you're saying he's not everything, the big book says you are therefore saying he is nothing. Or maybe I'll soften it a little bit and not say you're saying God is nothing, but whatever that is that you're describing isn't God. In order for it to be God, it has to be everything. Yeah, but how do we understand that? What do you mean God is everything? The table is here. The water bottles are here. The laptop is here. I'm here. And I'm very keenly aware of my existence. So, trigger warning, here's some Hebrew words. Don't get scared. You should know today and place it upon your heart. Know today and place it upon your heart. That's a very stern warning. It's not just know today, but place it upon your heart. That means listen up. Take this seriously. Meaning, this is not an easy concept to grasp, so I need you to pay attention. That's what the Torah is saying. Okay, what is this concept that I need you to really pay attention and take seriously? Ki Hashem hu Elokim, that the Lord is God. Hashem is one name of God. Elokim is another name. We'll maybe talk about the differences between those two names. B'shamayim imal v'ala'oretz mitochas, in the heavens above and on the earth below. Ein oid, there is none other. Ein oid, there is none other. Does this mean there is no other God, no other deity? No, that's not what it's saying. That's the second of the 10 commandments, not to worship false gods. This statement is much more categorical than that. It's not just saying there's no other God. It's saying, Ein oid, there is no other. There is no other. But how is that possible? I see a world. I see things. People, places, and things. So then how can you say there's only God? There's God and a bunch of people, places, and things. You still with me? Yeah? Okay. So let's get back to this idea, what I was saying before, that the manner of God's existence is that his existence is unconditional. And the manner of created existence is conditional. What that means is that all creation, all existence as we know it, which is created existence, it wasn't always here. It doesn't necessarily have to remain here. And therefore, even at this moment when it is here, it's not here absolutely or unconditionally. The Kabbalistic understanding of creation is that creation is not an event that happened at the beginning of time-space. Creation is an ongoing process which is unfolding every single instant, per se. Because, if you think about it, the default of all created existence is the non-existence from whence it derives. And if it were not for God forcing non-existence into a state of existence, it would automatically, seamlessly revert into its essential state of non-being. Carl Sagan. Remember Carl Sagan? Yeah, the cosmos. He had a great line. He said, and he purported to be an atheist, but he made a joke that you couldn't be an atheist to make this joke. This joke is very theistic and perhaps even Hasidic. He said, it's not a hilarious joke, I just want to warn you, by the way. So, yeah. He said, what are the directions for baking an apple pie from scratch. Step 1, create the heavens and the earth. You can laugh, that was the joke. Okay. Why, but it's such a clever joke. An apple pie from scratch. What do you think it means from scratch? It's like if the mix, if you go and you buy, do they have the Betty Crocker over here? Yeah, they have, okay. So you go and you buy the Betty Crocker mix, right? So that's not from scratch. You made it from a mix. Okay. Well, what if apples are already growing on trees? That's also not from scratch. From scratch means you have to create the heavens and the earth. You have to create trees. You have to create, there's nothing here. From scratch means there was nothing here. That's his joke, at least. You know the story about the scientists who wanted to show up God. They wanted to show God they don't need him. So they said, God, we can now create a human being just like you created a human being. And they opened up the book of Genesis to the account of the creation of man, where it says God took the earth and he formed it in the shape of a man. He breathed within it living breath. So they took some dirt and they made a mound of dirt. The scientists, they made a mound of dirt in the shape of a man. And they had wires hooked up to it, electrodes hooked up to it, running a current into this mound of dirt. And they're reading the lines from Genesis. As they're reading the lines, they're simulating it in their own way. And they're about to flip the switch of this big switchboard. And it's going to send this current running into this mound of dirt. And it's going to animate the mound of dirt. And it's going to stand up and walk around and talk and become a living, breathing human being. And they're going to show God that they can do what God did. They can create a man just like God created a man. And they're going to animate this pile of dirt. By the way, in England, I've been told this before. You know what in America dirt is? It's soil, right? Everyone knows, okay. No, because somebody was telling me dirt's like schmutz. I don't mean, yeah, you know what I mean, right? Like soil, like earth. What do you call it? Earth? You call it earth? Okay, earth, okay. Fine, I'll speak English over here. Earth. So that, but it's dirt. It's better for the, can I just call it dirt? Because it's better for the punchline, which I've already killed. Okay, fine. All right. So at any rate, so these scientists, they have this mound of dirt, and it's in the shape of a man, and they're about to flip the switch, and they're going to run a current, and these electrodes are going to animate this mound of dirt, and it's going to get up and become a man, and they're going to show God they don't need God, they could create a man and make this mound of dirt get up and walk around. And they're about to flip the switch, and all of a sudden, a voice booms forth from heaven and says, "Not so fast. Get your own dirt." Okay. So, but what... This is a deep joke. What's the point of the joke? That even if these scientists were to be able to animate this mound of dirt, that's not creation. Because they're working with raw materials that already exist. Creation is working from raw materials that do not exist. Or more aptly stated, creation is using non-existence as the raw materials for created existence. I know this is deep stuff. But if you can grasp this, I think some things become very, very clear. Creation means that non-existence is being forced into a state of temporary conditional existence. And if it weren't forced into a state of temporary conditional existence, it would automatically revert to its essence of non-existence. And therefore, creation is an ongoing process. Now, that explains a lot of stuff. I'll tell you one thing it explains. One thing it explains is, remember I was talking about before, to be or not to be, about having a hang-up about your own existence and feeling uncomfortable in your own skin and just feeling uncomfortable existing? Well, now it makes a lot of sense why it should feel uncomfortable to exist. Because it's not natural to exist as a separate something. The real reality is oneness, that there's nothing but the everything. He's the only thing. There is none else. So to be put into this weird condition of having this sense of separateness, of an identifiable, knowable, discrete self, that can cause a lot of pain. And it does cause a lot of pain. Now, 90% of the population doesn't feel enough pain from their own existence that it ruins their lives. But there are some sensitive souls who feel the pain of existence. And that's why there are no conditions that can be improved to alleviate that pain, because the pain isn't caused by circumstances. The pain is caused by just being in a state of existence. It explains so much. It explains why, in fact, maybe this is a bold statement, but what's normal? What's actually normal? Somebody who's comfortable with existence or someone who's uncomfortable with existence? We call it, society, calls it normal when somebody's comfortable with existence. But if you have an understanding of the theological mechanics of this, it should be the exact opposite. You should be uncomfortable with existence. Existence itself should be painful. And if you don't have a way of taking care of that pain, it'll drive you insane. So addiction is the way of numbing or distracting yourself from awareness of your own existence so that you can forget for a while that you're a something. But it has all those damn side effects, addiction. So then self-consciousness becomes, so you can't use the addiction anymore, you have to go back to the self-consciousness, and that becomes unbearable. And like we explained, that dance between those two options. But then the third option of God consciousness or spirituality, what does that mean? That means, and I hope this will make sense now based on everything that I've been saying, God consciousness or spirituality is the ability to simultaneously be functional within your separate selfhood, but to understand that truly there is no separation. And therefore, you are at peace and you do feel whole because you're not separate from the one. And therefore, you have serenity. And therefore, you don't have to numb yourself or distract yourself in order to show up for any aspect of your life. Okay, so that's one thing that this model of reality explains. But there's another thing. When we understand that the nature of created existence is that it is conditional and relative, and that it's being forced into its state of existence, and that it's unnatural, and it's not the default. When we understand that, we understand another thing, which is that if all of this is correct, then obviously every detail of creation is only the way that it is right now because it's actively being made that way by God at this moment. Because if he weren't actively choosing to make it be that way at this moment, it would revert to its default of not being. So what does that mean? And I'm not saying that this is what Dr. Paul O means and acceptance was the answer, but I'm saying if you have a little bit of Hasidic education and you read what Dr. Paul O wrote, it makes a lot of sense. And I'll just read it again. Acceptance is the answer to all my problems today. When I'm disturbed, it is because I find some person, place, thing, situation, some fact of my life unacceptable to me. And I can find no serenity until I accept that person, place, thing, or situation as being exactly the way it is supposed to be at this moment. How can you say that this person, place, thing, or situation is exactly the way it's supposed to be at this moment? Very simple. The person, the place, the thing, the situation, it is only here at this moment, as opposed to being nothingness. It's only here as somethingness, because God is making it be that way at this moment. Now, I may not like the way God is making it be at this moment, and I'm entitled to my opinion. But feelings aren't facts. I can say I don't like it, but it doesn't change the reality that this is the reality that God is choosing. This is how it's supposed to be for now. And by the way, I just want to clarify, when we say that this is evidently the way that it's supposed to be for now, that's faith, not fatalism. What's the difference between faith and fatalism? Fatalism means because it's this way now, it's always going to be this way. It's never going to change. That's fatalism. Who are you to make such a prophecy of doom? It's never going to get better. When we say that apparently everything is the way that it needs to be for now, we mean for now. At this moment. At this moment, because this is the way God is creating it at this moment. Now, a second from now, he can completely change it. Nothing's stopping him. Remember, he's creating something from nothing. So everything's completely malleable. Everything's completely flexible. God can do miracles. There's no obstacle to him to create it in a completely different way a second from now than he's creating it at this second. But the fact remains, at this second, this is the way he's creating it. And so, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? I'm going to fight with reality. I'm going to tell God he's getting it wrong. So my father's a psychologist. A lot of people think I'm a psychologist, but I'm not. I'm a rabbi. That was my rebellion. I became a rabbi. But my father told me once, he said, what's the difference between neurosis and psychosis? Which in my home growing up was the setup for a joke. So that's how I grew up. So he says, psychosis means that I think 2 + 2 = 5. Neurosis means that I know 2 + 2 = 4 and I can't stand it. Right? Like 2 + 2 = 4? No, I don't like that. It shouldn't be. Right? That's neurosis. It should be something else. But 2 + 2 = 4. You can not like it, but 2 + 2 = 4. Whatever creation is at this moment is 2 + 2 = 4. That's just the fact. That's how it is. And if it could have been any other way, it would be, because God has infinite choices every single second how he's going to recreate reality at this moment, and this is the reality he's choosing. So we're going to bemoan that 2 + 2 = 4? What a waste of energy. I won't even say that it's blasphemous, which it is. I'll say something more, I think even more compelling, which is, it's just exhausting. It's exhausting. There's a saying in the Talmud, Hakol bidei shamayim chutz miyiras shamayim. Everything's in the hands of heaven except for one's awe of heaven. What does that mean? It's a very categorical statement. Everything is in the hands of heaven. Like, everything. Except for one's awe of heaven. What does that mean? Everything's in the hands of heaven means that people, places, things, situations are in the hands of heaven. They are the way God is creating them at this second. And if he didn't want to create them this way at this second, he wouldn't be. Nothing's compelling him. They are being brought into somethingness out of absolute nothingness at this second, anew, exactly as their Creator in his infinite wisdom has chosen to do so. Everything's in the hands of heaven. Except, where does God not exert any authority or control? One's awe of heaven. One's awe of heaven means your moral free choice, whether you choose to live in awe of God or you choose to live in awe of people, places, things, and situations. So we don't get to choose how God is creating reality at this second, but we get to choose how we feel about it. So Dr. Paul says, when I'm disturbed, it is because I find some person, place, thing, or situation, some fact of my life unacceptable to me, and I can find no serenity until I accept that person, place, thing, or situation as being exactly the way it is supposed to be at this moment. Nothing, absolutely nothing happens in God's world by mistake. To me, that makes a lot of sense. I need to concentrate not so much on what needs to be changed in the world as on what needs to be changed in me and my attitudes. Everything's in the hands of heaven except for one's awe of heaven. I can't change the reality because, and I shouldn't even want to change it because this is the way that God is making it, but I should want to change the way I'm reacting to it in a way that's more in line with what God is creating at this moment, which is basically an invitation on my part to show up. So when I reject the reality, it means I don't want to show up. I don't want to be present for it, right? Which is, that's that inclination for addiction. I want to numb out. I want to check out. I want to distract myself. I don't want to be here. I don't want to feel what I would ordinarily be feeling. So this whole acceptance thing really implies some very deep concepts. I just want to summarize very briefly some of these points, and then we'll take a lunch break. If we really believe this idea that nothing, absolutely nothing happens in God's world by mistake, that the world would not be here, it would not exist, it would be nothingness at this moment, except for the fact that God is making it exist as it is existing, exactly the way it's existing at this moment, then what happens? Consequently, we are capable of showing up for reality however it is. That does not mean that we suddenly feel that every moment of reality is pleasant. I think that's a big mistake that people make. They think acceptance means, oh, so now your life's going to be good. No, that's not a promise that your life's going to be good. It's a promise that you'll be sane and serene when your life is good or not good, whatever way, but however it is. Some moments are pleasurable, some moments are painful, some moments are interesting, some moments are boring. But whatever it is, I can be present for it, and I can see the necessity of that moment, meaning I can see that this moment is the way that it is for a reason. Sometimes I don't know the reason because the story takes a while to unfold, but I always know that there is a reason, and therefore I can show up for whatever it is. I can show up for the most hellish, nightmarish, horrifying thing if I truly, truly embrace this concept that it is being created at this moment the way that it needs to be at this moment. And it's not an accident, it's not a mistake, it's not that somebody fell asleep at the wheel. God is an active creator. Creation is a dynamic, living, pulsating thing. And therefore I can show up for every moment. Okay, so what I want to do is, this is heavy stuff. I thank you all for bearing with me. We'll take a little lunch break, and we'll come back, and we'll do a guided meditation to try to put ourselves into this mind state.